When people say The Mummy, they don't mean Boris Karloff. They don't mean Christopher Lee. They definitely don't mean Tom Cruise. They mean Brendan Fraser. They mean Rachel Weisz. They mean 1999. And now, in 2025, Universal is finally doing what fans have been asking for since the moment the 2017 reboot flopped. They're bringing back the duo that made The Mummy a household name. Fraser and Weisz are officially returning for a fourth film, and if you ask me, this isn't just a nostalgic cash grab. It's a strategic resurrection of the franchise's true identity, and it's happening just in time. Let's start with the obvious. The 1999 Mummy is the version that lives rent-free in the public imagination. It's the one people quote, meme, and revisit every October. It's the one that spawned sequels, spin-offs, animated shows, and even theme park rides. It's the one that made Brendan Fraser a swashbuckling icon and Rachel Weisz a fan-favorite heroine. And it's the one that still holds up, not just because of its effects or pacing, but because it was fun. That's what Fraser himself said when asked about the failed 2017 reboot starring Tom Cruise. Quote, "The ingredient we had going for our Mummy was fun. That was what was lacking in that incarnation." End quote. And he's right. The 2017 Mummy tried to launch a cinematic universe. It was dark, brooding, and self-serious. It forgot that The Mummy isn't just horror, it's pulp adventure. It's treasure maps and ancient curses and witty banter in the face of death. It's Brendan Fraser cracking jokes while dodging sandstorms. It's Rachel Weisz deciphering hieroglyphs with a twinkle in her eye. That's the magic. That's what people wanted, and that's what they're finally getting again. But to understand why this return matters, we have to go back. Not to 1999, to 1932. The original Mummy, starring Boris Karloff, was a slow-burn horror film steeped in atmosphere. It was eerie, poetic, and iconic in its own right. It spawned 4 sequels: The Mummy's Hand, The Mummy's Tomb, The Mummy's Ghost, and The Mummy's Curse. And if we're being generous, Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy counts as a 5th. These films laid the groundwork for the Mummy as a cinematic monster, but they never reached the cultural saturation of Dracula or Frankenstein. Then came Hammer's 1959 reboot, starring Christopher Lee as the titular mummy and Peter Cushing as the archaeologist. Some argue it's not a reboot, but let's be honest. It borrowed heavily from the Universal films. It's a remix of the best parts of the original, along with all the sequels, condensed into one film. And yet, it's barely mentioned today. It's a footnote in horror history, overshadowed by the Technicolor blood and gothic castles of Hammer's Dracula series. So when Universal rebooted The Mummy in 1999, they weren't just updating a monster, they were reinventing the genre. They fused horror with action-adventure, added romance, humor, and spectacle, and created something that felt fresh and timeless. And it worked. The film grossed over $422 million worldwide. It spawned The Mummy Returns, The Scorpion King, and even Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. But that last one, that's where things went off the rails. Tomb of the Dragon Emperor shifted the setting from Egypt to China, Rachel Weisz didn't return, Maria Bello stepped in, Luke Ford was introduced as the son, Jet Li played the villain, and while the film made money, it didn't resonate. It didn't feel like a spin-off, it felt like a spin-off, not a continuation. It lacked the chemistry, the tone, the heart, and now Universal is reportedly ignoring it entirely. That's not just a retcon, it's a reset. They're going back to what worked. Back to Fraser, back to Weisz, and hopefully back to Egypt. And timing matters. Brendan Fraser is currently 56. That's still believable for a swashbuckling hero. But time is ticking. Look at Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I'll preface this by saying I liked the movie. In fact, I'd rather watch Dial of Destiny than Temple of Doom any day of the week. But the one thing no amount of movie magic could ever overcome was Harrison Ford's age. He was in his late 70s when the film was shot and turned 80 by the time it hit theaters. And yes, action-adventure films always require a willing suspension of disbelief. But good luck convincing the average viewer that an 80-year-old man can still sprint through ancient ruins, leap from moving vehicles, and swing a whip without breaking a hip. That's why The Mummy 4 is arriving at the perfect moment. Fraser is still in that sweet spot. Older, yes, but physically capable and emotionally resonant. He's fresh off an Oscar win. He's back in the public eye. And Rachel Weisz has kept her momentum from The Favorite to Dead Ringers. The chemistry is still there, the timing is right, and the suspension of disbelief still intact to a degree. Now, some people didn't love The Mummy Returns. They criticized it for being bloated and over the top, especially with the infamous CGI Scorpion King. However, the film succeeded in delivering what sequels are meant to offer. More of the elements audiences enjoyed. Rather than trying to recapture the exact magic of the 1999 original, which was never going to happen, it expanded the adventure in Mythology with bigger action sequences, deeper lore, and the return of beloved characters. In contrast, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom faced such strong backlash that Spielberg and Lucas felt compelled to bring back the Nazis in The Last Crusade. And this move paid off, as many fans regard Crusade as the best Indiana Jones film. The reason? It recaptured the familiar tone and spirit of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Familiarity, after all, breeds affection. And if you want a masterclass in giving audiences exactly what they expect, look no further than James Bond. From Dr. No in 1962 all the way through Die Another Day in 2002, the first 20 Bond films followed a formula so iconic that it became a genre unto itself. Cars, guns, gadgets, girls, exotic locations, villains with layers, quips before the kill. It wasn't just repetition, it was ritual. Audiences didn't go to a Bond film to be surprised. They went to be reassured, to see the tuxedo, the martini, the Aston Martin, and the gadgets that defied physics. Sure, there were exceptions. On Her Majesty's Secret Service broke the mold with a more emotional arc and a tragic ending, and License to Kill, that one was a real curveball. Bond wasn't serving Queen and Country. He was avenging the death of his friend Felix Leiter. It was personal, it was brutal, and it was controversial. Because the Bond in License to Kill wasn't the Bond audiences were used to. Just like On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it felt like an anti-Bond film. And while both have their fans today, they were jarring at the time, because they disrupted the ritual. But the formula endured. It didn't matter if Bond was played by Connery, Moore, Dalton, or Brosnan. The core ingredients remained, and audiences kept coming back. Because in action-adventure, familiarity isn't a flaw, it's a feature. And that idea of giving audiences more of what they already like isn't new. It goes all the way back to the 1930s and 40s. Look at Johnny Weissmuller's run as Tarzan. 12 Tarzan films released between 1932 and 1948. 12. And he's still considered the definitive Tarzan. That iconic chest-thumping yell, that came from Weissmuller. He didn't just play Tarzan, he became the template. And when his Tarzan run ended, Columbia Pictures cast him in Jungle Jim, a similar jungle adventurer role. 16 films followed. And when Columbia lost the Jungle Jim license, they didn't stop. They just had Weissmuller play a fictionalized version of himself in the same kind of stories. Audiences didn't mind. They wanted more jungle adventures, more animal encounters, more Weissmuller swinging through vines and diving into rivers. And Columbia gave it to them. That's the same logic that made The Mummy Returns work. It didn't reinvent the wheel, it just kept it spinning. But The Mummy didn't just succeed by repeating itself, it expanded. It became a franchise you could watch, play, and live in. It had sequels, spin-offs, theme park rides, and yes, video games. The Mummy Returns had a PS2 game. The Scorpion King had one too. They weren't blockbusters, but they extended the brand. And that matters, because in the late 90s and early 2000s, movie tie-in games were a huge part of a franchise's cultural footprint. Let's tie it back to James Bond. GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64 didn't just sell consoles, it made Bond cool again. Then came Agent Under Fire, Nightfire, Everything or Nothing, Tomorrow Never Dies. Okay, these weren't just cash-ins, they were cinematic experiences in their own right. Voice acting, original storylines, even full-motion cutscenes. They helped define Bond for a generation that may not have grown up with Connery or Moore, but knew the Brosnan era through gameplay. And that's the power of transmedia. It doesn't just extend a franchise, it reinforces it. It turns passive viewers into active participants. The Mummy tapped into that same energy. Maybe not with the same polish or reach, but it was part of the ecosystem. It had games, it had rides, it had merchandise, it had mythology, and most importantly, it had characters people wanted to follow, not just once, but again and again. And here's where things get even more interesting. The late 90s and early 2000s saw a wave of pulp adventure revivals. The Phantom, The Shadow, Sky Captain, The World Tomorrow, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and Van Helsing, just as a few examples. All of them tried to tap into that serialized monster-hunting, globe-trotting energy, but only The Mummy stuck. And ironically, it was the one that wasn't born from pulp at all. The original 1932 film was atmospheric horror, not serialized adventure. Meanwhile, The Phantom came from comic strips, The Shadow started in pulp magazines, Sky Captain was a deliberate homage to the 1930s and 40s pulp aesthetic, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen starred Sean Connery as Alan Quatermain, Indiana Jones before Indiana Jones, and Van Helsing, directed by Stephen Sommers himself, director of 1999's The Mummy, had all the monster hunting DNA baked in. It didn't set the box office on fire, but it released during the peak of the DVD market in 2004 and built a fan base that still defends it today. So why did The Mummy endure while the others faded? Because it didn't just revive a genre, it became the definitive version of it. It had the tone, the cast, the mythology, and the timing. And now, with Fraser and Weisz returning, it has the chance to do it all over again. What The Mummy 4 needs is focus, and that means Egypt, not just as a backdrop, but as the beating heart of the story. The first two films worked because they were rooted in Egyptian mythology, Egyptian iconography, and Egyptian atmosphere. The desert, the tombs, the curses, the sense of ancient wonder, that's the path that started in 1999. And now that Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz are back, Universal needs to follow it through. This isn't the time to pivot to Aztec ruins or Incan temples. They can't pull another Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. That detour diluted the franchise's identity. Egypt is the visual language. Egypt is the emotional anchor. Egypt is the Mummy. Because when most people think of the Mummy, they don't think of Karloff's slow shuffle or Hammer's gothic dread. They think of Fraser cracking wise in the face of danger. They think of Weisz translating ancient texts while the walls close in. They think of scarabs, sandstorms, and a hero who's just barely keeping it together. That's the version that stuck. That's the version that endured. And now, it's coming back, not as a reboot, not as a reinvention, but as a return. A return to the characters, the tone, and the mythology that audiences never stopped loving. If Universal gets this right, The Mummy 4 won't just revive a franchise. It'll remind Hollywood that sometimes the best way forward is to go back to what worked and do it well. Because in the end, sequels aren't just about continuing a story. They're about continuing a feeling, a rhythm, a promise. And when that promise is kept, when the audience gets what they came for, with just enough surprise to keep it fresh, that's when a franchise doesn't just survive, it thrives.